Thank you, sir. First of all, I'll thank everybody for sparing this time on this Saturday evening. I know this is not a time for a meeting or any conference. This is a time to be spent with the family. I'm also visiting my family right now. Can you start this thing? Actually, this is an honor for me to be a speaker in front of this audience. There are a few people here who have seen me growing up. I might be quite junior to everybody. This session is not a teaching session. This is something to stimulate your thoughts. It is something for discussion. Actually, when I was told about this topic, cardiovascular risk management, I thought this is a topic for a conference for 2 days rather than a talk for 15 minutes. So I thought I'll give a very superficial aerial view of this topic, and I'll try to do justice with this topic in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So why are we looking at this risk management and what are the challenges in the solution? Over the next 15 minutes, I'll be talking about what are the current challenges and what are the current challenges which include the changing epidemiology, the early detection of risk factors, control of risk factors, and what are the solutions for that, like implementation of the guidelines and improvement of the patient compliance in terms of medications. If we look at the epidemiology of cardiovascular diseases over past 3 to 4 decades, there's a major change. Going back in 1970s, this is the world data. This is not an hypothetical figure. This has been published by WHO. In 1970s, non-communicable diseases accounted only for around 36% of our morbidity and mortality, around 1/3. Trends have changed. In 2008, this data was published in 2010, which showed that around 63 to 65% of people have a morbidity and mortality related to non-communicable diseases. And if we have a growth in a similar way, by 2030, can I have a hand mic, please? By 2030, this is going to be around 75 to 80% contribution to different morbidity mortality in our community. Now, this is a world data, but but India is not far away from this. I hope people can hear me at the back with this mic. India is not far away from this. If you look at the Indian scenario, again published by WHO, not an hypothetical figure, non-communicable diseases account for around 53 to 55%, going parallel with the world data. And to our surprise, cardiovascular disease is the major killer. This slide has been surprise to most of the people because in talks where I have asked which is a major killer, majority of people have answered me it's a cancer. Some have answered me it's a road traffic accidents. Few have even answered me that it's a diabetes. But if you look at the real world, it is the cardiovascular diseases, whether in isolation or in combination with diabetes. That is a major killer, the #1 cause of death. And this is, I'm talking about Indian data. And the major concern is that this major killer can be prevented in 80% of cases. 80% of these deaths are preventable. I'm not talking about treating a patient of MI. I'm not talking of treating a patient of unstable angina. I'm not talking of doing an angiography, angioplasty. I'm just talking about the prevention of these disease. And 80% can be prevented by our effort. And this effort is most important thing. So what we can do as a physician for preventing these cases, for covering this 80% people, first of all is the early detection of risk factors for cardiovascular diseases. This is the most important slide which I'll be waiting for some time. These are the risk factors. These are risk factors not only for cardiac disease, I'm saying for cardiovascular disease, which include a stroke, which may be hemorrhagic stroke or embolic stroke, which even includes peripheral vascular diseases. Among these, there are a few things which we cannot alter. The things on the right side, like our age, being males, our family history, these are the things which we cannot alter, but things on the left side, these are the things which we can make a difference. At this point, whatever difference we can make, I must stress on one point before going forward. Lifestyle modification, dietary modification are the mainstay. These have to be the first thing whenever we are managing risk factors in any patient. And lifestyle modification and diet modification should be a part of our prescription. When we write a medicine, at the end of our prescription, we should definitely mention about the diet and lifestyle modification. And each and every risk factor, right from this stop smoking till this high blood pressure, can be modified with these things. I'll be jumping from all these things because today I'm not going to stress on lifestyle modification or dietary changes. That itself is a separate topic. I'll be more concentrating today on the things which we can modify with medicines. Medicines, I'm talking in terms of primary prevention. I'm making a stress at this point. I'm not talking about the patients who already had a heart attack, who already had a stroke, or who already had an unstable angina. I'm talking about those patients who didn't have even any of these diseases, and we are preventing these patients to have an MI, to have a stroke. So first and the foremost thing which we as a physician we should be aware of the guidelines. Once we are aware of the guidelines, then only we can reinforce them, then only we can implement them. There are lots and lots of guidelines. Each and every disease has got a guidelines. Each and every society has their own guidelines. But today I'm going to focus on few guidelines which are for prevention of heart disease rather than treatment. Look at the hypertension guidelines. Most of us follow these JNC 8 guidelines, the latest one, though they are American Hypertensive Society guidelines also. This is most easy to remember. This is most easy to follow. They have simplified it a lot. The thing to remember here is now we are more liberal in controlling our blood pressures. People who are more than 60 years of age, we need to control our blood pressure to systolic blood pressure of less than 150 and a diastolic blood pressure up to less than 90. Rest all groups, any individual less than 60 years. This is very easy to remember actually. They have simplified it. Next target is 140 to 90 in any individual who is less than 60, in any person who is a CKD patient or a diabetic patient. These are liberal guidelines. Earlier guidelines were much stricter. There were a lot of different groups had a different BP targets. But to make it simplify and make it more applicable in the clinical practice, they have come down to two major groups. Target 150-90 for elderlies, anybody who is more than 60. Target less than 140 by 90 for any individual less than 60 or people who have CKD or diabetes. Now, in spite of all these things, in spite of all these guidelines, it has been found that around 60% of people only achieve a target blood pressure, systolic blood pressure of less than 140. And in spite of all these guidelines, multiple society guidelines, I have found physicians, even the studies have found physicians that they are scared to treat patients till their BP is more than 150. So that should not be our aim. If we go back and look at those guidelines, 150 systolic BP is a point where we have to treat anybody who is more than 60 years. Anybody who is less than 60 years, we have to treat them even if the systolic blood pressure is more than 140. Generally, it's a casual attitude. We say, okay, it's between 140, 150, we'll just wait and watch. We are not waiting and watching for this blood pressure to come down. Actually, we are waiting and watching for this MI to come. We are waiting and watching for stroke to come. Another important aspect for preventive cardiology, another important aspect is control of lipid profile, control of our cholesterols. This is a very controversial issue. It is again, the recent guidelines which came up, they are quite confusing. So I have tried to simplify them. I have tried to make them in 4 basic groups. We have to treat a patient in 2 ways. Either they require very high intensity statin therapy to lower, either they require a very high statin therapy or they require a moderate intensity statin therapy. Individuals with established coronary artery disease, established atherosclerotic cardiovascular diseases, they require high intensity statin therapy. I'm not talking on numbers. I'm not saying that patient with LDL more than 150 or 160 should be given this statin therapy. I'm saying any patient with any LDL level who is a coronary artery disease patient requires high intensity statin therapy, which converts in form of full dose atorvastatin, which may be 80 milligram, or a rosuvastatin of 40 milligram, or a 40 milligram of simvastatin. Apart from this, a person who is not having atherosclerotic heart disease, a person with a LDL cholesterol of more than 190 also falls in the same group. They require very high intensity therapy, and our target is not a number. I'm not coming down to a number less than 70 or less than 100 of LDL. My target is reduction of that level to more than 50%. So if I'm starting with an LDL level of 100 in a person who has an atherosclerotic heart disease, I'm targeting at a level less than 50, not more than that, not more than that at all. Then there is another group in which we require a moderate intensity statin therapy. This group includes this diabetic patients who have a individual between 40 to 75 years and their LDL level is between 70 to 190. What happened to people with more than 190? They fall in the upper group. They fall in the intensive very high dose statin therapy, but individuals between 70 to 190, they can be managed with a moderate dose therapy. And this now, apart from these two therapies for risk reduction of hypertension and diabetes, there have been other guidelines, there have been other recommendations for primary prevention, and one of them is use of aspirin, low dose antiplatelet, low dose aspirin. There was a recommendation published by American Heart Association and Diabetic Society. They recommended that individuals with diabetes between age of 55 to 70 or 79 or 80 years, they are better to be treated with low dose aspirin for prevention of any secondary event. Rather, I'm saying they are better to be treated with aspirin for primary prevention. Again, these people have suffered from any stroke, any heart disease, but still they require aspirin. These are the guidelines. There was little controversy about these because some people were concerned about GI bleed, some people were concerned about a stroke. So ultimately they ruled out, they have excluded people more than 80 years in this group, and they said anybody between 55 to 80 years with diabetes should be better treated with low dose antiplatelet agent. Now, looking at the prevention, then we have got statins, we have got antihypertensive, we have got antiplatelets, and if we look into the treatment of people who already have coronary artery disease, they require antiplatelets, they require statins, they require antihypertensive, they require anti-diabetic. So by if we follow each and every guideline, we are adding one more medicine to the patient. It is easier for us to explain to a patient that you had an MI, you need at least 5 medicine, and it is much difficult for a person who walks into a clinic with a diabetes and we tell them you take aspirin, you take statins, you take antihypertensive, especially when they say I am completely asymptomatic, why should I take these 4 or 5 tablets? This is a major issue. Here lies the importance of our education, educating the patient. In each and every visit, we have to reinforce to them, no, you have to take this. This is like vaccine, this is like prevention, this is like preventing you to have a heart disease, and this is like preventing you to take 10 medicines rather than you take 3 or 4 medicines right from now. This also raises certain things, particularly of compliance. Actually, when these guidelines were formulated, there's a small story behind them. They found that in spite of having these guidelines, in spite of teaching physicians about these guidelines, there was the amount of benefit we achieved in a trial did not convert into our clinical practice in the real world. Use of statins improved survival in trials up to 50-40%, and when we went into the real world, it was only 10-20%. Then there were issues, what is actually happening? They started training the physicians, this thing slightly improved to another 10%, but still there were a lot of issues, there were a lot of things that probably we were missing. Then they went into the issue, what is happening to the compliance? There was a study, there was a very interesting study. There's a premier study that was conducted in patients who already had MI. When I say who already had MI, are those people who has passed through a stage in which they were almost about to die. These people are generally more concerned about their health. And when these people were followed over a period of 1 year, only 66% of people were taking all 3 medications. This was a real big surprise. Like somebody who had suffered from a disease, from a deadly disease, and among them only 2/3 were taking the medications. Almost just 1/3 stopped the medications. Some of them even stopped all their 3 medicines. And this is very common in a clinical practice. We find people of MI, first 1 month, 2 months, they are very strict in medicine, they are very strict in their diet. Next 2 months, they lose their diet control. In next 2 months, they lose their lifestyle modification. And another 1 year, they lose all their medications. After 1 year, they come back to us saying, sir, मेरे को तो सब कुछ ठीक ठाक था, मेरा तो सब अच्छा चल रहा है, so I stopped all medication, and they land up in another myocardial infarction. So how does this poor compliance convert into mortality? The same study showed us that people who discontinued all 3 medications, the mortality graph separated within 3 months. And people, even those who have discontinued their 2 medications out of their 3 essential medication, they have a higher mortality as compared to those who continued their medication, irrespective of which medicine they are saying they have left. It's not like that people have left aspirin so they had MI. People who left statins, people who left antihypertensive, people who even discontinued their medication to prevent negative remodeling, they have a higher mortality. So it's not like that we can tell a patient, okay, you continue aspirin, you stop your beta blocker, you continue aspirin and beta blocker, you stop your statin. Statins and beta blockers are as important as aspirin in these group of patients. So looking at these issues, looking at this study, then people came up with the idea, okay, let us try. If compliance is an issue, We have to educate the physician, we have to educate the people, but again this was not successful. Then they took people, general public interviews. So the major issues for non-compliance was, number one was the cost. Especially in the country like India, they said we could not afford these medicines, we cannot have 5-6 medications for the whole life. These account for around 3,000-4,000. Even if they go for the cheapest medication, they accounts for around 3,000 or 4,000 rupees per month. Plus another issue was, people said we are too busy to take medications in 2 sittings. I prefer taking all the medications in the night, so I stopped taking medications in the morning. Some people said I'm coming late in the night and I had 2 drinks, so I stopped my night medication, I'm taking only my morning medication. So number of medication, the cost, both were the 2 factors which was a major issue that provided very bad compliance. Looking at this, there was a randomized trial conducted in which around 2,000 patients who had established coronary artery disease and risk factor for CAD. They were given a fixed dose combination which had a statin, antihypertensive and aspirin depending on their requirement. And other group was almost 50% of people receive all these medicines separately. And as it was expected, people who had fixed drug combination, their compliance was much better. It was around 77 to 80%, and people who were given individual medicines, their compliance was very poor. And if I go back in the slide, you can see India was one of the centers in this. This was conducted in Europe and India was one of the centers in this. And probably, I'm pretty sure if we separate Indian and European people, Indians would have been very bad in the compliance. After this issue, after these trials, when the fixed dose combination started showing better compliance, and which further converted into better mortality and morbidities, different societies, they started coming up with the ideas of fixed drug combination polypills. And it was European Society of Hypertension, which for the first time, a society came up with the idea of combining antihypertensive medications with statins and antiplatelets, aspirin. They had a concept that most of the hypertensive have multiple cardiovascular risk factors. Most of them had dyslipidemia, but they had a warning issue. They said unnecessary medication should not be given just to improve the compliance. It should not be the fact that because patient requires an antihypertensive, patient requires a statin, we should give a fixed dose combination and give him an added aspirin with that. So they said it should be used in wherever indicated, but if these 3 drugs are used in a hypertensive patient, it is always better to use a fixed dose combination rather than going for separate drugs. Other societies also followed the same thing, American Heart Association and then American College of Cardiology. And to my surprise, I was recently going through Harrison. Even Harrison has mentioned the concept of polypill now. And even FDA is also considering about this. And it was like this was the only way, they said, to increase the adherence apart from physician's education, apart from physician telling the patient not to discontinue medication. I'll stress again, prescribing a poly pill is not the end of our job. We have to educate patient, no, you have to take this medicine, you have to take this medicine for your whole life, and this has to be reinforced on each and every visit. So if we look at the benefit of these fixed dose combination, first of all is the improved adherence and the compliance. This definitely converts into better, significant reduction in our cardiovascular mortality, but at the same time there is also some cost saving. Now there is another Indian study which analyzed this drug combination in which this polycap was used. This was a TIPS trial. We had 2 TIPS trials. There was a TIPS 1 trial which was for the primary prevention, and TIPS 2 was a secondary prevention trial. In this, they used a drug in which they have almost 5 drugs in together, and they found that if we look at the BP control, when a single drug was used, and a double drug was used, and a 3 drugs was used, and when a fixed drug combination was used, BP control was much superior to other groups. So at this point, they also find that LDL levels, cholesterol control was also better. I'm not stressing that it was because of the medicine. This improvement was because of better compliance. And during all these trials, apart from giving a fixed drug combination, people were very well educated. They were told about the importance of medicine continuation, but using this fixed drug combination definitely made a major difference. Now, concluding the things which I have just talked, coronary heart disease and stroke are the biggest killer, as I mentioned in the earlier slides. Hypertension, dyslipidemia are the major risk factors, and these risk factors need an early recognition We need to know the guidelines, we need to follow those guidelines, implement those guidelines, and definitely fixed dose combination has come up with a newer thing. It is like an aeroplane which was initially built by Wright brothers. We are still in those early stages. Time is to come up with further fixed dose combination for more diseases, to cover more risk factors, and we are heading towards a jet age now. So I think I'll end my session over here.